The floor indicator showed -47, then -48, then -49. The elevator was still going down, and I had no idea what was waiting at the bottom. I want to be honest with you. I told myself I would never go back. I said that out loud, standing in my kitchen at 4 in the morning after the first descent. I meant it. And then 6 days later, I got back in the elevator anyway. My name does not matter. What matters is what I found. 47 floors below a building that is only supposed to have 14, in a space that every blueprint, every city record, and every geological survey says is solid bedrock with no voids, no cavities, and no rooms. I could see my own breath, not because it was cold when I left my apartment, because the temperature dropped steadily the deeper the elevator went, and by the time I could see it, I already knew I had passed somewhere I had never been. The floor indicator kept counting. The numbers were negative, and they were accelerating. And somewhere in the back of my mind, the part of me that verifies data for a living was already calculating what those numbers meant in terms of depth. The math was not reassuring. In episode 1, I found a button in my elevator that should not have existed. I pressed it. I descended 93 seconds past the basement and arrived at floor 0, a perfect replica of my own hallway bathed in amber light, with something standing behind a cracked door watching me. I escaped. I brought back physical evidence, mineral powder on my shoes, a gap in my phone's GPS data, and 4 filled-in screw holes where a button had been deliberately removed from the elevator panel and hidden. All of that is documented. All of that is real. The emblem on the permit bolted to the lobby wall, Pell Hearn Construction, a company that built this tower in 1983 and dissolved in 1991 with no explanation and no forwarding address. I kept thinking about that name. I kept thinking about what they might have known. The post office where Pell Hearn filed their permits is long closed, but the permit is still on the wall, still bolted to the lobby of the building they built. Sometimes the only evidence that something happened is the thing they forgot to take down when they left. 6 days after episode 1, I was sitting at my office desk staring at data I could not process because my mind was somewhere entirely different. It was in an amber hallway 47 stories underground. It was in front of a door with a handle that was turning. It was thinking about the second button. Because on the morning of day 6, when I stepped into the elevator to go to work, there was not one void button anymore. There were 2. The original one I had pressed before, and directly below it, a second one, a button that had not been there the night before, and that second button went somewhere the first one never did. I went home that evening, and I sat on the kitchen floor, and I prepared. Not because I was fearless, I was not, but because I had been carrying a question for 6 days that only going down could answer, and carrying it was becoming its own kind of weight. I watched the clock. 2:49 in the morning. 2:50. The minute hand crossed the threshold. I picked up my phone, my flashlight, my notebook, and I walked out of the apartment toward the elevator at the end of the hall. This time felt different from the first. The first time, I pressed the button by accident of curiosity, without truly believing it would do anything. This time, I pressed it knowing exactly what it could do. That is a completely different kind of decision. The hallway was empty. Of course it was empty. It is always empty at that hour. But it felt emptier than usual. The kind of empty that suggests the building is aware of where you are going and has decided to clear the path. I stood in front of the panel for almost a full minute before I reached out. The 2 dark buttons were there, just as they had been that morning, both absorbing the fluorescent light, both completely still. I hovered my finger between them. Then I pressed the lower one, the one that had never been pressed before. It gave way the same way the first button had, not a click, a yielding, like pressing into something that had just enough resistance to feel deliberate. And then the elevator shuddered once, gently, and the descent began. The light changed faster this time. It went through amber in about 30 seconds and kept going, deepening into a rust red that made everything in the elevator look like it was lit by something at the edge of a fire. The floor indicator went dark as it passed the basement level, and then, instead of staying dark like it did the first time, it came back. Numbers started appearing, negative numbers, cycling downward, and they were accelerating. I tried to record everything. My phone's screen had horizontal static lines rolling through it from the moment the button was pressed. The video was corrupting in real time, but I kept recording anyway, because corrupted footage is still footage, and fragments of evidence are still evidence. I could feel the cold moving through my hands on the railing before I could properly see my breath. It built gradually, steadily, the way temperature drops when you descend into a cave system, not sudden, patient. The railing grew frost around my fingers, like the metal was responding to my presence. I counted seconds the same way I had the first time. 10, 20, 30. The first descent took 93 seconds to reach floor 0. At 60 seconds this time, the elevator had not even slowed. At 90 seconds, it was still moving. At 120 seconds, I realized I was going somewhere the first button never reached. By the time the indicator hit -40, the walls had a thin ice layer forming from the floor upward. The composite floor had frost at its edges. I could see every exhale I took as a small white cloud that drifted and dispersed in the cold, rust-red air. And the indicator kept counting. -45. -46, -47, and then the elevator slowed, decelerated smoothly, and stopped. 4 minutes and 12 seconds of descent. At a normal elevator speed, that puts me approximately 300 feet below the building's foundation, 300 feet into rock that is not supposed to have anything inside it. The doors began to open, slower than usual, as if the mechanism was straining. And through the widening gap between the two steel panels, light began to come in. Not the amber from floor 0, something different, cooler, pale blue-gray. And beyond the light, space, not a hallway, space. I was not looking at a corridor. I was not looking at a room. I was standing at the threshold of a cavern so vast I could not see its ceiling or its walls. And spread across its floor, in that pale, sourceless blue-gray light, were structures, buildings, a city built 300 feet below the ground. I want to be very precise here, because I need you to understand the scale of what I am saying. This was not a chamber. This was not an underground facility. The structures extended in every direction, further than the light allowed me to see. Whatever was built here was built at the scale of a city, and it was built by something that was not human. I took my first steps out of the elevator. My sneakers made contact with the floor, and I noticed immediately that it was tiled. Hexagonal tiles, each about a foot across, fitted together with the kind of geometric precision that takes either centuries of craftsmanship or a mind that thinks in mathematics the way we think in words, and they glowed. Each tile had a faint blue light coming from inside the material, not from underneath it, from within it. The structures on both sides of the main avenue rose 40 feet above me. They were not rectangular, not boxy. They curved upward in shapes that looked organic, like the cross-section of a massive root, or the inside of a shell, or the branching of something that grew instead of being constructed. Their surfaces were a dark material that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, and they were covered in markings. I pressed my face close to one of the structure's surfaces to look at the markings, and what I saw at that proximity was something I was not prepared for. The markings were not carved into the material from the outside. They appeared to have grown into it from within, like the information was part of the structure's composition, not added to it afterward. It suggested a method of building we have no equivalent for. The avenue stretched at least 200 feet ahead before the ambient light faded into darkness. I walked it slowly, sweeping my flashlight left and right, my phone recording everything it could through the static. The structures grew more densely packed further from the elevator. The city went deep, much deeper than the light let me see. My hands were still shaking. I want to be clear about that. I was functioning, I was documenting, I was asking questions and trying to answer them, but my body had not agreed to any of this, and the tremor in my hands was its way of registering a complaint it could not otherwise express. From what I could observe of the city's layout, the structures were not random. The main avenue was clearly intentional, a central path with organized passages branching off it between structures. The city had been planned, it had been arranged. Whatever built it thought in terms of infrastructure and navigation. I crouched down and held my flashlight close to one of the floor tiles. The glow I had noticed from standing height was not a surface effect. At close range, I could clearly see that the light was coming from within the material, slightly brighter at the edges of each tile, where the hexagonal joints met their neighbors. Whatever the tiles were made of, they were not simply glowing, they were storing and emitting energy, after what might have been millennia. Then I noticed my breath cloud drifting sideways, not dissipating straight upward the way it would in still air, moving horizontally in a consistent direction toward the deeper part of the city. The air in this cavern had circulation. Something was still moving air through this space. Whatever powered this city was not entirely dormant. I was approximately 200 steps from the elevator, moving slowly, when my flashlight fell on a shape on the ground. I stopped immediately. Every instinct I have said stop, and so I stopped. And I looked, and the shape was not a rock formation. The shape was a figure, lying on its side, not moving, not breathing that I could detect, but clearly, deliberately shaped. It was not human. I need to say that plainly and without drama, because the reality of it is strange enough on its own. It was shaped like a human, the way a rough draft is shaped like a finished sentence. The general structure was there, limbs, torso, head, but everything was proportionally different. The limbs were too long, the head was too oval, and when my flashlight found its hand, I counted 7 fingers, each one tapering to a point. I counted 7 fingers on each hand 3 times before I accepted what I was seeing. 7, tapered at the tips, more joints than human fingers would have. Whatever these hands had been capable of in life was more dexterous than anything human hands could accomplish. The fine gray dust covering the upper surface had settled so evenly it might have been here for centuries or longer. I stood up and swept my flashlight in a slow arc across the surrounding floor, and one by one, the beam found more of them. 1 against the nearest structure, 2 more in the middle of the avenue, another partially inside what looked like a doorway. I kept sweeping, the beam kept finding them. Dozens of figures, all in the same posture, all still, all covered in the same fine gray dust, all of them looking as if they had simply decided to lie down and never gotten back up. What struck me most was not the number of them, it was the posture. None of them showed signs of a struggle. None of them were positioned the way a person falls when something goes wrong. They were curled slightly on their sides, eyes closed, arms resting. Every single one of them looked like they had chosen to stop, as if the entire city had made a collective decision to go quiet at the same moment. The dust on their surfaces told its own story. It was too fine and too evenly distributed to have been disturbed in a very long time. The layer covering each figure had accumulated with geological patience, the kind of patience that does not measure time in years. Whatever happened here, it did not happen recently, and nothing had moved through this space since. I photographed every figure I could reach. I moved around each one, keeping my 3-foot distance, documenting from every angle I could manage. My phone's corrupted recording was frustrating, but I kept going. The static lines rolling through the screen did not matter as long as some of the image data survived. Something would get through. Something had to. And then I found the wall, the largest structure in any direction I could see, a curved surface that rose 60 feet and stretched the full width of the avenue. And from its base to as high as the ambient light reached, it was covered in symbols, row after row, organized, deliberate, intentional. This was not decoration, this was information. This was a civilization leaving a record. The rows of symbols started large at the base and became smaller higher up, as if the most important information was placed at eye level and the rest built upward from there. Some rows had consistent, even spacing. Others were more varied, different sizes, different densities, as if written with different urgency. The entire surface was an archive. I could not read a single character of it, but I understood what it was. Near the bottom of the wall, at approximately the height where someone standing would find their eyes naturally resting, there was a section that stopped me completely. Among the angular geometric symbols of the alien script, a sequence of characters appeared that were different, more curved, more familiar, not quite human letters, but shaped in ways that my brain kept trying to resolve into meaning. And that sequence repeated 3 times across the same section of wall, identical each time. I stood in front of that repeated sequence for a long time. I traced the shapes in the air without touching the wall. My lips were moving but making no sound, trying to assign sounds to shapes that were not built for human mouths. And eventually, looking at the curves and the angles and the internal logic of the characters, my mind settled on a single interpretation. I cannot prove this, but looking at that repeated sequence, what my brain kept reading was something very close to the word silence. And then I felt it. Not heard it, felt it. A low vibration in my chest, arriving before any sound reached my ears. The way you feel a train approaching underground before you can hear it. A deep resonant pulse coming from further inside the city. And simultaneously, the hexagonal tiles beneath my feet began to pulse brighter. The city was responding to something. The tiles were waking up. The light was intensifying in waves moving from the far end of the city toward where I was standing, each wave slightly brighter than the last, the rhythm accelerating from a slow pulse toward something faster and more urgent. And on the surfaces of the structures around me, the markings that had been completely still were beginning to move, slowly swirling, rearranging, as if the information carved into those walls was becoming active. I ran. I did not think about it. I did not weigh the decision. Every instinct I have overrode every question I still wanted to ask, and I ran back down the avenue toward the elevator as fast as I could move. Behind me, the city was brightening. The sound was growing, the patterns were accelerating, and my only thought was the warm orange rectangle of elevator light visible at the far end of the avenue. My exit, my way back up. The elevator doors closed slowly, too slowly, and in the final seconds before they sealed, I saw it. Far in the distance, among the dozens of motionless figures lying on the glowing city floor, one figure was different. It was standing, upright, still, its head turned toward the elevator, toward me. It had been lying with the others the whole time I was in that city, walking past them, photographing them, and it had simply waited until the moment I was about to leave, and then it stood up. The doors sealed, the elevator began to rise, and I spent the entire ascent trying to understand what it means when one of the sleeping wakes up specifically to watch you go. In episode 3, I find out what the symbols on that wall actually say, because someone translated them before me in 1983, the same year Meridian Tower was built. And what those symbols say is the reason Pelhern construction ceased to exist. Subscribe to Neon Void World. The city is awake, and I am not the only one who has been inside it.